In 512 BCE, a desperate king sat on a throne that was barely his. The kingdom of Wu was surrounded by enemies, its army outnumbered, its treasury empty. And then a man walked into the palace, a man who claimed he could turn peasants into soldiers, fear into strategy, and weakness into the deadliest weapon of all. His name was Sun Tzu, and he was about to write the most dangerous book in human history. 2,500 years later, his book The Art of War is required reading at West Point, studied by NFL coaches and quoted by billionaires. But here's the twist: nobody actually knows if Sun Tzu was real, and if he was, he might not have written a single word of it. Let's start with what we think we know. Sun Tzu, literally Master Sun, allegedly lived during the spring and autumn period of China, roughly 544 to 496 BCE. He served King Helü of Wu as a military strategist, and according to legend, he proved his worth in the most bizarre job interview in history. The king challenged him. "Can you train anyone to be a soldier?" Sun Tzu said yes. The king pointed to his 180 concubines and said, "Train them." Sun Tzu divided them into two companies and appointed the king's two favorite concubines as commanders. He gave clear orders. They laughed. So he did something horrifying. He executed the king's two favorite concubines on the spot for insubordination. The king was furious, but the remaining 178 women suddenly became the most disciplined soldiers he'd ever seen. Or so the story goes. The problem? This tale comes from a text written 400 years after Sun Tzu supposedly died. The earliest actual mention of Sun Tzu appears in a Han Dynasty catalog from 110 BCE, 2 centuries after his death. No contemporary records mention him, no inscriptions, no tomb. Modern scholars are divided. Some say he was a composite figure, a name attached to centuries of military wisdom. Others argue he was real, but the art of war was expanded and edited by later strategists. The truth? We may never know. But here's what makes this ghost so powerful. It doesn't matter if he was real. The ideas are devastatingly real. The art of war is only about 13,000 words. You can read it in an afternoon, but it contains concepts so advanced that they feel ripped from a modern psychology textbook. Let's break down 3 of his most dangerous ideas. All warfare is based on deception, he wrote. When able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. The Allies used this exact principle in 1944. They built a fake army complete with inflatable tanks and wooden planes across from Calais, France. Hitler believed the real invasion would land there. It didn't. It landed at Normandy. Sun Tzu would have smiled. Today this plays out in corporate strategy. Apple famously disguised the iPhone project as a music player internally. Competitors didn't see it coming until it was too late. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, and for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. This isn't just military advice. It's the foundation of modern psychology, negotiation, and competitive analysis. The FBI's behavioral science unit literally studies criminals to know the enemy. Venture capitalists study competitor weaknesses before investing. But here's the deeper layer. Knowing yourself is harder. Sun Tzu believed most defeats come from internal flaws, ego, arrogance, emotional decisions. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand, he warned. Preparation beats passion, every time. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This is Sun Tzu's most radical idea. The ultimate victory isn't destroying your opponent, it's making fighting unnecessary. The Cold War was essentially a Sun Tzu strategy. Both superpowers built arsenals so terrifying that neither dared use them. The enemy was subdued, not through battle, but through the threat of battle. Modern economic sanctions follow the same logic. Why invade when you can collapse a currency? Why bomb when you can embargo? Sun Tzu turned war into a logic puzzle, and 2,500 years later, we're still solving it. If Sun Tzu walked into 2026, he'd recognize the battlefield immediately. It just looks different now. Bill Belichick, one of the most successful NFL coaches ever, has quoted The Art of War in press conferences. His philosophy? Study opponents so thoroughly that you predict their plays before they run them. Know the enemy. In Silicon Valley, Sun Tzu is startup gospel. Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal, wrote that competition is for losers. Sun Tzu would agree. He advised finding uncontested ground. Don't fight where the enemy is strong, fight where they aren't looking. Even MMA fighters study Sun Tzu. Conor McGregor famously said, "Precision beats power, and timing beats speed." That's pure Sun Tzu. Speed is the essence of war. Take advantage of the enemy's unpreparedness. But the darkest modern application? Cyber warfare. Nation-state hackers don't attack head-on. They infiltrate silently, gather intelligence, and strike only when victory is guaranteed. It's Sun Tzu's subdue without fighting, digitized. The 2010 Stuxnet attack on Iranian nuclear facilities? It wasn't a bomb. It was a virus that made centrifuges spin themselves to death while displaying normal readings. The enemy didn't know they were defeated until it was over. Sun Tzu would call that perfect victory. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The art of war has a body count, and not all of it belongs to enemies. The Nazis studied Sun Tzu. So did the Khmer Rouge. Mao Zedong carried a copy during the Long March, and later used its principles to engineer the Cultural Revolution. Deception and subduing without fighting work for dictators too. In business, Sun Tzu's deception can become fraud. Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos deceived investors, employees, and patients claiming technology that didn't exist. She knew her enemy's psychology. She used it to destroy them. The book doesn't have a morality section. It tells you how to win, not whether you should. That's on you. This is why West Point doesn't just teach the art of war. They teach it alongside ethics, international law, and just war theory. Strategy without conscience is just sophisticated cruelty. So, who was Sun Tzu? A brilliant general? A mythical composite? A pen name for centuries of anonymous wisdom? It doesn't matter. Because 2,500 years after a man may or may not have walked into a palace and killed 2 concubines to prove a point, his ideas are still winning wars. Military, economic, psychological, digital. Sun Tzu's final lesson isn't about war at all. It's about adaptation. Water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. The soldier works out his victory in relation to the foe whom he is facing. The world changes, the ground shifts, but the mind that understands the terrain, any terrain, never loses. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. Sun Tzu, The Art of War.